The land down under has never been easier to reach. United Airlines has more flights between the U.S. and Australia than any other U.S. airline, so you can fly nonstop to destinations like Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. Explore dazzling cities, savor the very best of Aussie cuisine, and get up close and personal with the wildlife. Who doesn't want to hold a koala? Go to united.com/Australia to book your adventure.
Our desert, it's not the likeliest spot for a tropical Polynesian escape, but somehow tiki bars fit right into the, weirdo replicant vibe of Las Vegas fantasy. I mean, think about it. The elaborate drinks, audacious decorations, poo-poo platters, they're not out of place thousands of miles from the source. Vegas truly kills it with tiki. But is it all fun and games? Today on CityCast Las Vegas, we drink it up with CityCast co-host and food historian Sarah Lohman. She helps us track the origins of tiki in America and Vegas, explains the flames and the flair of it all, and also how the old staple is being rethought from a 21st century lens. It's Thursday, August 8th. I'm Dayvid Figler. Here's what Las Vegas is talking about. Sarah, why are they called tiki bars? And tell me, how did this culture come to be in the United States?
I just Googled something. Not that I'm not prepared for this lovely interview. It's just I did just realize that I don't know when the word tiki became married to the idea of a tiki bar, because the bar style existed before then. That's why I suddenly had this moment. Okay, so here's the thing. Do you know what the word tiki means, out of curiosity?
No idea.
I didn't either. I looked it up. It's a Maori word, so that's the language of the indigenous peoples of New Zealand, and it means a large wooden or small stone image of a human figure.
Oh, okay.
So I think we know tiki best as combining elements from the larger Polynesian triangle. The Polynesian triangle is Papua New Guinea to Hawaii to New Zealand. And a big part of the vibe of this is really because of World War II, when a lot of soldiers were stationed in the Pacific. They had a certain romance. We can call it exoticism. We can call it parts of the colonization of that area that Europe and America has been doing since the 19th century. But they came back with a lot of desire for the tastes and flavors and vibes of the South Pacific, essentially. But interestingly, the earlier bars were actually inspired by the Caribbean, not the South Pacific. So do you want to hear about some of the first tiki bars that opened not as tiki bars, but the people who became major tiki players?
Yeah. I mean, I am curious about the evolution. You always do such a good job kind of bringing it home, but I didn't know there were tiki concepts before tiki was the branded thing. So yeah, please tell me.
Yeah. So the first two started in California. Really, this is like a Prohibition era thing. So a lot of Americans that wanted to drink went to the Caribbean, think Hemingway. And a lot of our best bar talent went to Europe or the Caribbean. And so it was a couple of bar owners who opened up post-Prohibition bars who had been drinking in the Caribbean. The first was a man named Ernest Raymond Beaumont Gant, who later became known as Don the Beachcomber. And he opened up a tiny bar in 1933 in Hollywood.
Much better name choice. I'm just going to say that.
Easier to say. I assume he went by Ernest Gant, but I've got all four names here. So that was 1933 when he opened up Don's Beachcomber, and then there was a Don the Beachcomber here in Las Vegas in the 1960s through the late 80s. The second one opened up in Oakland. A man by the last name of Bergeron opened up his own bar called Hinky Drinks in 1937, and eventually he took the name Trader Vic and became known as Trader Vic's. Both of these men were huge in the tiki movement and would own multiple bars throughout the country. They invented some of the drinks we consider tiki drinks, like the Mai Tai was Trader Vic's signature drink. They also invented a lot of tiki cuisine, which we can get into too. But a lot of these had these Pacific Hawaiian theme by the 50s and 60s, which is considered the heyday of tiki. Interestingly, and you might have memories of this because I certainly do, most of the staff was Cantonese. There was a larger immigration coming from China at the time. We overturned some racist immigration laws during World War II. And so in the lulls between tiki revivals, these traditions are often carried on in Chinese restaurants. Have you ever been to a Chinese restaurant and they have like a back page of Mai Tais?
Yes. Like, you're stirring memories like that I have completely forgotten about. But yeah, you're right.
I remember it like in my early days in New York. Like if you wanted cheap tiki drinks, if you wanted tiki drinks, period, you went to a Chinese restaurant. Yeah, and it's because there is this through line through the staffing of these original 50s and 60s locations that it stays within the Chinese community. Isn't that fascinating?
Interesting. Yeah. And I'm also envisioning, like, I don't want to call it a uniform, but sort of this more festive garb that we would associate with like a visit to Hawaii, with the kind of Hawaiian type shirts that have sort of the floral patterns on them, et cetera, that there would be leis involved, that there would just be this whole, I'm going to call it kitchification of, island culture.
Yeah, and it's like very mid-century, again, post-World War II, because of the experience that a lot of men had in South Pacific, because of immigration, because of new marriages between U.S. servicemen and women from the South Pacific. Like a lot of that culture was coming into America in a real way. And these was definitely like a kitschy derivative version. I mean, let me say two things about it. This is very much of a time. It has a mid-century worldview. And it is important because it is the only post-prohibition cocktail movement we have until the 1990s, unbelievably. The cocktail revival has been attributed to things like Cosmos and apple martinis, these really colorful mixed drinks, whereas we had literally been drinking like rum and cokes and vodka sodas for about 50 years. There's a lot of different factors involved in that. But in the middle of this dry spell of cocktail creativity, we have these amazing drinks that have lasted now for almost 100 years. The downside of it all is there are a lot of great tiki bars in the 21st century, but there are some that haven't gotten the memo that we really should not be borrowing iconography from these cultures for our interior design anymore.
Yeah, and I want to get to that, Sarah, but before we do, I want to stay in the mid-50s for a second with the sort of, I don't know, is it fair to call it exoticism? Because to me, it seems like, you have these like newfangled drinks being invented. And let me ask you about that before I go any further.
Sure.
Are all the tiki drinks somehow going to be fruity and sugary? Mai Tai is a fairly fruit-forward drink and pretty sweet.
Yeah, definitely. I do think that is sort of iconic of these drinks. You're occasionally going to get something that's a little bit more savory, like maybe like a navy grog. There's just a little bit of sugar in there, but it's not a savory cocktail movement. It's traditionally cold because we're talking about hot places like Las Vegas too. They're traditionally rum-based, but not exclusively. There's going to be a lot of citrus in there too, so it definitely plays on sweet and sour, but then also other fruit juices like papaya, pineapple, coconut, even banana.
Which would have been exotic flavors to mid-century United States, I would imagine.
I mean, I think that's a good point, David, because I think some of what makes this possible is the increase of transportation, refrigeration, trade, Dole, the last World's Fair in Queens, too, in the early 60s. Like, fresh pineapple from Hawaii was like a big feature of it, too. So they're not necessarily new ingredients. People have been eating pineapples in America for a couple hundred years, but it's about affordability. It's about canning. It's about shipping. And I should say, too, that tiki cocktails, it's not just sweet and sour and fruity. It often usually involves layers of flavor by building these sweet syrups like falernum, which is a ginger almond lime syrup, or like in Mai Tai, that's based on orgeat, which is an almond and orange flower water. And there's also another mixture called gardenia, which Don the Beachcomber was famous for. And that's like butter, honey, cinnamon, allspice, vanilla to make this like creamy, spicy drink. So we are building on like layers and textures in different ways.
How about the food? Because there is food. Not every tiki bar serves food, but I imagine part of that whole movement was around food as well. So what kind of food are we talking about?
Yeah, definitely in the 40s and the 50s, which is also when tiki bars are opening here in Las Vegas. The earliest tiki bar I've been able to track here to Vegas, which this is early in our timeline. The first place that appears to be a tiki bar is called the Mandalay Bar, not the Mandalay Bay, but the Mandalay Bar. It's a South Seas themed bar, and it opened in 1940 in the Frontier Club, basically the year after the Frontier Club opened.
Right on what became the Las Vegas Strip.
Exactly. So as Las Vegas and the Strip City is really being created, so is Tiki in Vegas too. And that's really in the timeline. You know, those other bars in California were late 30s. But I think probably the best known mid-century one was Aku Aku, which was in the Stardust.
Yeah, I went to that many times.
I'm jealous. Such a weird contrast between the futuristic Stardust building and signage, and then the outside of Aku Aku was styled sort of like a Polynesian home. And then the enormous heads, too.
Which are still in existence at Sunset Park.
Yes.
So here, when I was a kid, and this is kind of like a little reminiscent, when we would go to the Stardust, oftentimes we only ate at the coffee shop there. But sometimes, for whatever reason, Dad would get a better comp. And we'd either go to one of two more gourmet restaurants of the day. So there was Aku Aku with the big statue or the wooden totem.
They're called moe. They're from Easter Island. They're a traditional symbol of the native peoples of Easter Island.
Right. Very big and impressive, especially to a little Dayvid. And they had these big open mouths. And sometimes people would put like matchbooks and things like that, which was always gross.
Funny.
But I always put my hand in there just because. So they had these two kind of like, over-the-top restaurants in the Stardust. Aku Aku, the Polynesian, and Moby Dick, the seafood place. Very, very fun.
Well, UNLV has a copy of like an early 1960s Aku Aku menu, and it is not just Polynesian. So it is massive because Tiki was this mashup of all of these different cultures. Let me give you a couple examples of some of their menu items. It had Hawaiian barbecue spare ribs, wild golden bamboo baby quail marinated in Genghis Khan sauce, saimin, which is Hawaiian ramen, egg rolls and wontons, and they also had Kashmir, Madras, and Javanese curries, too.
Fun. Of course, at this time, Sarah, Hawaii had become a state in 1959. There was a lot of Hawaii mania that paired perfectly with the Tiki movement that was starting to move across the country. What other Tiki presence was in Las Vegas early on?
So aside from that the Mandalay Bar, which I don't know why the Mandalay Bay isn't capitalizing on that. Aku Aku opened up in 1960. And again, you can go see those heads, which are actually carved out of volcanic rock. At where? Sunset Park is where they got moved after the restaurant closed.
They've been there a long time now. They've been there a couple decades at least.
88. And they were carved by Eli Headley, who is Bamboo Ben's grandfather. And Bamboo Ben is like one of the go-to designers for tiki spaces all over the western part of the country. So it's like a family legacy, which is so cool. Don the Beachcomber, he opened up his bar. You know, we talked about him
his
in
franchise.
LA. His franchise in the Sahara in 1962, and that was open until like the late 1980s.
Yeah.
And like you just see a lot of like things popping up in the 60s. There was a place called the Hawaiian Steakhouse in 1964, Castaway's Restaurant, 1960s. I just want to credit Vintage Vegas because I didn't know about the Hawaiian Steakhouse, Castaways, or the Mandalay Bar. I mean, that webpage is just like the go-to if you want very specific timeline Vegas information. It's so great.
Yeah, he does a really good job with that.
Yeah.
Well, let's fast forward a little bit. 2023, the Stray Pirate Bar opens up.
Yeah, one of your faves.
Right, and we've hung out there, enjoy it for a lot of different reasons. It's in the Arts District. It was designed in part by Bamboo Ben, who you mentioned, whose family lineage goes back to Vegas Tiki for a long time.
Yeah.
He's actually done quite a few spots in and around the area, including Frankie's Tiki Room and a new one that's, I think, coming up. But they were very vocal to say that they aren't a tiki bar per se. So what's going on there?
Well, look, I think one of the great things about Tiki and the legacy that needs to continue is these marvelous drinks and also making drinks within that style. But I think that what really great bars are doing now is they are divorcing themselves from the interior design of a classic Tiki bar. Because the deal is when you're appropriating all of that religious, symbolism and cultural symbolism, it's not cute. It's not fun. There's this great article that everyone should read called The Appropriation Problems from the LA Times. And it's really about the fact that Tiki needs to have a reckoning. And they reached out to a couple incredible scholars at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. One of them is Stephanie Nohalani Tevis, and she called it colonial nostalgia, which I think is a great way to put it. That it's not cute to the people who are being caricatured by this knockoff tiki art, because it's not attributed, it's not even bought from artists who are making the real deal in a respectful way. It's just people like making sculptures that look like they're kind of from the East.
Yeah,
And
not in every case. I mean, some go a lot more authentic than others. You're really referring to the kind of the cheeky tiki, right?
Cheeky tiki, but I don't think
the cut rate, the plastic stuff,
I
things
don't
like that.
approve of quote unquote authentic tiki interior design either. It is not our culture. White people should not be making interior design out of the literal tikis of South Pacific peoples and of Polynesian peoples of the Polynesian Triangle, because these are areas that are violently colonized by Europeans and Americans. This is a bad history. And the reason that we can do it and think it's cute is because we're the oppressors in this case. I mean, I know I'm going like probably pretty wild for some people.
Well, here we go, Sarah, because myself and others and you, we enjoy a lot about tiki bars.
Yes, it's
in
true.
general. We like the drinks. We like the vibe. So I'm thinking of like Disney Enchanted Tiki Room. It's a fun vibe. There have been exotica musicians, people like Esquivel, who played Las Vegas and was very popular, and that music tends to go hand in hand with it. And the foods are delicious. And so it's this kind of age-old question about enjoying the offerings, embracing. I mean, I know people who go on tiki pilgrimages and they want to hit all the tiki spots.
Have to be connected. We can have tiki drinks, tiki food. There's things that you can pull out and appreciate without drinking these drinks out of the heads of other people's gods, right?
So is the religious iconography specifically the problem?
Yes, we should not be using religious and cultural items of significance from other cultures in our drinkware. But look, okay, so Todo Bien is a newer tiki bar that is doing tiki-inspired drinks.
What's it called?
Todo Bien. It's all good. It's a Mexican tiki bar, essentially. It focuses on agave spirits like tequila and mezcal, and their cups are cactuses. Really cute, differently varied cactuses.
Where's that at?
That's in Uncommons. And like, okay, like one of the classics ones, Golden Tiki, has those scary talking parrots just like at the Enchanted Tiki Room too. But even though there's some iconography there in their interior design, and this is like, Golden Tiki is one of our classic tiki bars. It's more about mid-century textiles. The mugs are piratey. It's like skulls and stuff. And you can add fire to any drink. Like, that's tiki, baby. It's not just about the mugs. It's the adornments. It's the flames. It's the fresh flowers. And appropriately, Golden Tiki is in Chinatown. So it also maintains that sort of connection to our Chinese immigrant community. Like, ditch the appropriation. It's not fun. I mean, can you imagine being someone who is Hawaiian or Polynesian in a space like that? It sucks.
Well, I got to say that two of my favorite bartenders over at Frankie's are both from Hawaii. I'm wondering if the issue that you're raising isn't with being transported to a tropical destination or even being sort of reminded of the culture as much as the specific or explicit use of the religious and cultural touchstones.
That's it. Like, don't make images of people in their religions. A lot of tiki is about a mid-century aesthetic, right? So it can also be a boomerang print rather than a tropical print. I mean, we love a transportative space here in Vegas.
Exactly.
And like Frankie's too, again, it has some of those older elements of tiki culture, but it's also just a great dive bar, right? With super friendly people. One of the things I love about Frankie's and basically all tiki bars here in Las Vegas is they're also really friendly to people who aren't drinking. You go up at Frankie's, you tell them the flavor profile you like, and they make you something just as delicious and just as beautiful, and you're not consuming alcohol. So I also love that inclusivity of it. It's just that there are some spaces that aren't leaving the parts of it in the past that should be in the past. Let's talk about Red Dwarf. I call that a dive tiki bar, right? So like it has some of the aesthetic. There's thatched roof, there's bamboo, but like, okay, first of all, they serve pizza, which it's really good Detroit-style pizza. They're
yes,
serving
the famous Detroit tiki culture.
I mean, that's the thing. It's fun, right? Like, also, why are we doing the same damn thing again and again? Like, innovating is wonderful. Red Dwarf is named after space and a sci-fi show. Like, why do we have to stay in the uncomfortable parts, the wrong parts of tiki's past for it to be tiki? Obviously, we do not.
So what other new tiki spots are here or on the horizon?
I think the one that we haven't mentioned that also we haven't been to yet is Tiki d'Amore, which I just love it conceptually because it's a patio behind a pretty famous Italian restaurant here.
Yeah.
And so you
now
can
that's
have
been online for a little bit, but I am ashamed to say I haven't made it over there because they did have some limited hours and it's seasonal.
Yeah, weekends. And you know what? And it might be less seasonal because they used to not be open in the summer and they are now. So we'll see what happens there.
We've got our fair share of tiki of different shapes and sizes. I wonder, Sarah, because you enjoy the genre, how do we size up against other communities?
I actually think that Las Vegas right now is probably the best tiki city in the country, Dayvid.
Wow, bold statement.
Yeah, I think the Palm Springs might be a close second. You know, obviously they're very known for its mid-century everything. They've got some great bars there, but I feel like most other cities have one really great tiki bar. Sunken Harbor in NYC, if you're ever there. Next time you're there, Dayvid, you've got to check it out. Smuggler's Cove in San Francisco. Talk about transportative. You're go into the basement of a hotel and there's a lake down there with a canoe that bobs around. It's magical in this very kitschy, fun way too. But I think the best bars, we have the best and the most tiki bars. And for this style that really was created here in America, I think Vegas is a really good home for all of its kitschy, transportative glory.
Okay, I think what we've done here is done a really nice survey of what exists here and how to get the most out of it and still feel good about enjoying where you are going.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that part of that onus is definitely on the bar owners, too, to be thinking about this more creatively. And it's time to shed the bad parts of tiki. We don't need it to have fun.
Sarah, you always bring the heart and the history to these discussions. So hopefully some good tips for people to pick out the best places that suit what they like.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks, Dayvid.
Thank you, Sarah. And that's all for today here on CityCast Las Vegas. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend? Rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Till then, stay lucky.